So these are Ardennes horses, the very popular forestry horses, one of the oldest draft breeds in Europe, if not the oldest, and they have remained very true to type, which means they're very short and compact, very stocky little animals, but incredibly powerful, and as you can see, very well muscled and plenty of bone. They're having their lunch at the moment, which is hay. They are what is known as thrifty animals, which means they do very well on very basic rations. These horses that you see here, their diet is mainly grass in the summer and hay in the winter. They get very little supplementary feeding. We do give them vitamins and minerals over winter to help with their bone and their general condition, but otherwise they do very well on a very basic diet of grass and hay. So here we've got Dylan, an Ardennes horse, coming through the woods. He's in a combination of American and English harness, using a Scandinavian timber arch. Dylan here is being hitched up to a couple of poles. I said before that the timber arch, which is a Swedish design, they still use horses a great deal in Scandinavian forestry, particularly again the Ardennes type of horse. The equipment that they use is modern, and it helps greatly in this sort of extraction process.
What about you? Where's your operation based?
Well, the Working Horse Trust is a registered charity. We're based near Tunbridge Wells in Kent. Our principal aim is to help promote the heavy draft breeds. Naturally, our own being of most concern, the Shire, the Clydesdale and the Suffolk Punch, our three traditional UK breeds, are all endangered. They are all monitored by the Rare Breeds Survival Trust. So the Working Horse Trust was set up to promote the heavy horse breeds, to keep them in the public eye, and to demonstrate that there still is a use for heavy draft horses in the modern age. And forestry is one of those niches that the horse can still fulfil a very valuable role. Well, they don't start seriously heavy work until they're 7, really. They finish growing at 7, but we start training them at 3. So from then on until they're 7, they're sort of learning and maturing. Then from 7, we've got the horse that's just going through the wood now is 7 years old, Hamish. And at the far end of the wood in the other Scandinavian timber arch is Unity, who's 22. So now she's not in full-time heavy work, but she does still work. I mean, they're working horses and they like to work, a bit like us really. And if you sort of stop and sit, you stiffen up and age more quickly. So they can carry on as long as they're fit and their joints are okay. They can carry on working well into their 20s. But light work, you wouldn't be doing heavy work with them.
What about all the harnesses and so on? Are they easy to get hold of?
Not terribly easy. With the sort of demise of the heavy horse generally has gone the craftsmen and the artisans that work around them. We do have half a dozen or so harness makers who make heavy horse harness in good English leather. But they've got waiting lists. So we tend to have a combination of harness. We use some North American harness. Obviously the Mennonites and communities out there, Amish communities, still very much reliant on horsepower, so they still are making and developing new harness and new equipment. So we do get some from North America, some English as well, but that has to be handmade, so it's quite expensive, and you do have to wait. But English leather harness is the best in the world, so it's a very worthwhile investment if you're going to own a horse, is to have harness handmade for it, and if it's well looked after, it will last a lifetime.
Does it ever happen that the horse and the horse logger don't get on well?
No, you wouldn't find that, because the horses that are used for logging are usually well trained, well experienced horses, and they've been trained and used by the handler that's using them for forestry work. So
it's more the younger ones.
It's very. The young ones, like any young adult, has to learn its trade, and you'd normally do that alongside a more mature horse. So like the combination we've got here today, we've got mature horses and we've got ones that haven't done a lot of forestry work before, so they're learning from each other as well as from you.
Yes.
So generally, the relationship is one of trust and respect, and it's rare to find people actually working with a horse that they haven't got a good relationship with, because if they hadn't got a good relationship with it, they wouldn't be bringing it out to work, because they have to trust the horse and the horse has to trust them. So, and that builds up over time, with good handling.
What about farriers these days? Are you able to?
There are farriers around still that will work with the heavy horses. It is slightly more taxing to work with them, but again, it depends on the horse. Ideally, when you've got a young horse, you start training it from a very early age to pick its feet up and to have its feet handled, so that when it comes time for it to be visited by the farrier, it's an easy job for the farrier to do. So it comes down to training, and there are farriers around still who will work with the heavies.
Yes.
So this is our stallion coming through now. This is Brunty. And he was bred originally in Sweden, where they still use horses a good deal for forestry work. So he's a well-trained timber horse, but it's quite unusual in this country to see a stallion at work. There's a debate sort of going on at the moment about horses being fit for purpose, and on the continent they insist that their stallions are worked. And any non-working stallion is not bred from, so that they can actually see what they're breeding from is a good working animal. That's catching on, a bit more here. It used to be the case in the days when horsepower reigned supreme. Stallions were worked as well as any other horse, but it's kind of fallen out of favour a bit. Well, there's been increasing interest in the use of horses over the last 10 years or so in British woodlands, particularly in environmentally sensitive sites. They're ideally suited to small woodlands, probably the sort of treble SI categories, where the management system demands that there's a minimal impact on the woodland floor. Horses make a very small footprint and it heals over very quickly. They don't do no damage at all, but compared to heavy machinery, particularly on sensitive soils or in areas where there's precious flora, the horse impact is very minimal, and the woodland floor restores very quickly. Also, they do very little damage to any standing crop. They don't damage coppice stools. So environmentally sensitive areas are ideally suited to the use of horse extraction, but also in difficult terrain. Particularly with the Ardennes, which is a very short, compact, stocky horse, but immensely powerful. They are very nimble, very sure-footed animals, and they can cope with difficult terrain that possibly traditional forestry machinery couldn't. The other area that we find there's been increasing interest is in small private woodlands where new owners have come in and they want a sensitive management system, and horsepower is that system.
Come over a step, come over a step, come over a step. Boy, away, and walk on, walk on, walk on.